should never have opened that note. The morning light poured over the kitchen counter, glinting on the edge of our wedding ring set beside the coffee mug. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, too clean, too sharp for home. I was 59, married to Tom for nearly 30 years, and I had learned that love is built on repetition. The same breakfast, the same laugh, the same stethoscope he left on the table before work. That morning, something broke that rhythm. The note lay folded under his stethoscope, my name written in his careful medical hand. I smiled first, expecting a small kindness. He used to leave me reminders to rest, to eat. But as I unfolded it, the paper trembled against my fingers. There was another name below mine, a woman's, her diagnosis written clearly. My name appeared again, listed as her informal contact. The coffee went cold while I read it twice. The words pressed into my skin like burns. My stomach turned to iron. I stared at the wedding ring on the counter and felt its weight without touching it. He came in whistling, smelling of soap and mint, and I asked quietly, "Tom, why does your patient's note have my name on it?" He didn't flinch. He didn't even stop tying his tie. "She's just a patient," he said, smooth as water. The way he smiled made something in me recoil. I'd seen that expression before on men who had practiced their lines. When he left for work, I stood in the silence of the kitchen, watching the dust move through the light. The smell of antiseptic clung to the paper. I knew I couldn't unsee those words. I pressed the note flat on the counter and noticed tiny smudges near the fold. His fingerprints, maybe hers. I made a copy of it that evening at the clinic, pretending it was part of a patient file. The copy machine hummed softly, and the scent of toner filled the room. I slipped the duplicate into an envelope marked "Personal" and sealed it with a trembling thumb. My heart thudded in rhythm with the machine. That night, he asked why I seemed distracted. "Long day," I murmured. He kissed my forehead, and I felt nothing. In bed, I lay awake, tracing the ridges of the note in my mind. I remembered how he used to write prescriptions for strangers and love notes for me, how both required the same neat handwriting. I thought of the promise we'd made at 40, no secrets. A vow, I realized, isn't broken in one moment. It frays quietly until the sound of tearing becomes too loud to ignore. At dawn, I sat at the table again, the same ring glinting in the same light. I wrote one line in my journal. No more silence. Then I placed the note beside it, side by side like truth and consequence. When he came down for breakfast, he smiled, careless, unbothered. He reached for his stethoscope, and as he walked past me, he said, "She was just a patient." The words echoed longer than the silence that followed. Guilt hides behind routine. The house moved the same way it always had, creaking floorboards, the hum of the old refrigerator, the faint buzz from the porch light we never replaced. Routine was the sound of safety, or at least it used to be. Lately, that comfort had started to feel like camouflage. I noticed how he laughed differently now, softer, more careful, as if afraid his words might betray him. Dinner conversations drifted into silence. When he looked at his phone, a small smile tugged at his mouth, one that never reached his eyes. The first night I heard the whisper, I thought it was a dream. But then came the repetition, the same name, quietly spoken, almost tender, a woman's name. I stood by the hallway, frozen, pretending to fix a crooked frame while his voice carried from the study. "She understands me," he murmured. The sentence hung like smoke, heavy and untraceable. The next morning, I told myself I was imagining it, but when I walked past his phone on the counter and saw a message flash, last night was perfect. Imagination no longer had a place. Claire, my oldest friend, sat with me in the garden that afternoon. She wore her worry plainly. "Don't confront him yet," she said, her hand resting on mine. "Keep records, always keep records." So I did. I started saving every message I could, every timestamp that hinted at what he was hiding. 2 messages became 4. By the end of the week, I had 10. Each ping of his phone hit me like a bell in a church I didn't want to attend. The garden became my witness. I pruned roses that no longer bloomed and listened to the faint ring of incoming texts from inside the house. The sound cut through the stillness, sharper each day. One evening, while trimming the ivy near the porch, I heard his voice through the open window. "Not tonight. She's home." Then silence. I gripped the garden shears so tightly my knuckles went white. The metal pressed into my palm, cold and certain. The porch light flickered above me, catching dust motes in its tired glow. I remember thinking how fragile that light seemed, how it kept shining even when it should have burned out. Later that night, I sat in the dark, scrolling through my phone. I opened the screenshots folder. Names, hours, words that used to be mine. Every tone and notification felt like another truth I couldn't escape. I printed the messages one by one. The sound of the printer filled the kitchen, soft but relentless. Each page slid out warm, marked with his carelessness. I stacked them neatly, aligning corners as if precision could hold back heartbreak. When he walked in, he smiled, absent, distracted. "Working late again?" I asked. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Someone has to," he said, and laughed. The laugh was hollow. I waited until he went upstairs, then touched the pile of papers beside the lamp. Proof. Paper thin, but heavy enough to shift the air around me. I pressed one page to my chest, hearing both the hum of the porch light outside and my own heartbeat counting the lies between them. In that moment, I remembered an old vow I once made to myself: never let love destroy your sanity. The words came back like an echo from another life, one where promises still meant something. The house was silent now. The phone on the counter buzzed once, twice, then again. I turned toward it slowly, my breath caught somewhere between dread and confirmation. The phone rang again, this time in her voice. Midnight reveals more than morning ever could. He had begun leaving earlier, returning later, always with an excuse that sounded too polished to question. The hospital needed him. Emergencies, double shifts. Life and death never had a fixed clock, he'd say, slipping into his coat while the porch light trembled behind him. But even lies have a rhythm, and his began to repeat like a faulty heartbeat. At first I tried to believe him. It's what love does. It bends around suspicion until it snaps. One night, the clock above the kitchen door read 11:42 p.m., and he still hadn't returned. The house felt airless, waiting. The hum of the refrigerator sounded louder than it should. I sat at the table staring at the empty chair across from me. By the third night of these absences, I noticed something stranger. His hospital badge, which should have been clipped to his uniform, lay forgotten on the counter. The ID glowed faintly under the kitchen light. I picked it up, cold plastic against my skin, and turned it over. His name, his photo, the same fixed smile. Without that badge, he couldn't access restricted floors. So where exactly was he going? At work the next day, I waited until my colleague David finished his rounds. He was a tech assistant, quiet, cautious, the kind of man who didn't ask questions unless he had to. I told him I suspected an error in our system logs and needed to confirm access times for one of the doctors. My voice shook more than I wanted it to. He leaned closer to the screen, typing in quiet bursts. The monitor's glow cut through the dim office, pale light painting our faces. The database opened with a soft ping, showing digital entries I hadn't expected to see. Timestamps, floor numbers, device IDs. My husband's name appeared again and again, long after midnight. "Here," David whispered, pointing at a line. Reference 34A9K, logged in at 2:47 a.m. I froze. That was the night he'd been home with me, asleep, or pretending to be. I had felt his warmth beside me, his steady breathing. The entry on the screen shimmered like a ghost, real and unreal at once. "Could it be an auto login?" I asked. David frowned. "No, this requires physical badge access." The air thickened around us. The light from the screen hurt my eyes, burning them until I blinked away the sting. I told him to print the record, and he hesitated. "You sure you want this?" he asked softly. Yes, I said. I want the truth. He pressed print, and the machine answered with a mechanical sigh. The pages slid out one by one, still warm. I folded the first copy and slipped it into my bag, next to the earlier note I'd photocopied. Proof layered on proof, paper over pain. That night, when I returned home, I watched the driveway from the window. At 1:12 a.m., headlights swept across the garden. He came in quietly, hanging his coat like nothing had happened. I stayed seated in the dark, the only light coming from the digital clock on the oven, its green numbers blinking 117, 118, 119. He didn't see me at first. When he finally turned, his eyes flickered in surprise. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Something like that," I replied. He smiled, the same practiced ease. "Long night. Don't wait up next time." I watched him walk upstairs, his footsteps measured, rehearsed. My gaze drifted back to the hospital badge still lying on the counter, the same badge that supposedly unlocked a computer miles away. I turned off the kitchen light. The room fell into darkness, but the faint glow from the oven clock stayed, counting seconds louder than any conscience. Proof doesn't need to scream, it just waits for the right hour to be seen. And that night, as the last number flickered from 246 to 247, I felt the chill settle in my chest. His ID logged in, but he was beside me in bed. Love leaves numbers when it dies. I used to think affection lived in gestures, shared breakfasts, quiet laughter, the touch that steadied a bad day. But sometimes love leaves ledgers instead, pages filled with what can't be said out loud. I noticed it first when a bill arrived addressed to both of us, our names paired with a balance that didn't belong to our account. A small mistake, I told myself, one easily explained. But mistakes don't repeat themselves, not with exact precision. When I checked the joint account, I saw it, a trail of transfers that pulsed like a heartbeat. $3,200, $4,500, $6,000, each one sent to the same name, E. Mills. The rhythm of betrayal, counted in clean digits. I remember sitting there, the silver pen in my hand shaking as I wrote the amounts on the back of an envelope. I kept my voice steady when I asked the teller for printed statements. She glanced at me once, her eyes flicking toward the name on the screen, then back to me. "You'll need to sign here," she said, sliding the paper across the counter. Her fingers trembled slightly as she stamped the proof, the sound sharp in the hush of the branch. The texture of the document rasped under my fingertips. Rough, real, undeniable. I took the pages home and spread them across the dining table like evidence at a trial. The numbers stared back at me, precise and merciless. For every transfer, there was a matching withdrawal from an account in his name. The pattern was too deliberate to ignore. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was the care, the consistency, the thoughtfulness of deceit. That night, when he came home, I asked, "Did you help someone from work recently?" He didn't even pause. "Just charity," he said. "Hospital fund." He poured himself a drink, the casualness cutting deep. "How much?" I pressed. "Not much," he replied, too quickly. $3,200? I asked, keeping my voice calm. The glass froze halfway to his lips. He looked at me then, really looked. "You went through my accounts?" "You went through our savings," I said. He laughed once, coldly. "You've lost your trust, not your mind." Then he left the room. But I already knew what trust cost now. $6,000, last transfer, dated 2 weeks ago. Later, I returned to the papers, tracing each number with the pen he'd gifted me years ago. The same silver one engraved with his initials. A small luxury, bought for anniversaries, now turned into a weapon of truth. As I read deeper, I saw a line of notes attached to one transfer. Consultation fee. But the recipient wasn't a clinic or a supplier, it was a private individual. E. Mills, a name without a business, just a person. I searched the hospital registry that night, pretending to organize my shift schedules. She existed, A patient, mid-30s, last seen in the maternity ward. My breath caught when I noticed the note on her file. Treatment paid in full. Reference ID 89F7. His ID number appeared beside it. He hadn't just been generous, he had been guilty. I thought of the note I'd found under his stethoscope, the whispered name, the lies wrapped in routine. Now it had arithmetic attached. The truth wasn't romantic. It was transactional. The stakes had changed. What began as suspicion had turned into proof, tangible and cold. My vow shifted in that moment. No more silence. No more pretending this was just a mistake. I folded the papers carefully and sealed them inside an envelope. On the back, I wrote one line in ink, "Debt paid in full." The next morning, he kissed my cheek on his way out, pretending everything was fine. His lips were warm, but I couldn't feel them. After he left, I opened the envelope again and stared at the final receipt, the one that carried both their signatures side by side. The receipt bore his signature beside hers. Walls remember what we forget. The house had become too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Every room seemed to listen now, waiting. I moved through it carefully, my footsteps soft on the old wooden floorboards, the air thick with the scent of dust and something unspoken. I found the recorder in the drawer where we kept batteries and forgotten things. A small old tape deck, outdated, harmless, patient. I placed it behind the hallway vase where the curve of porcelain hid the red light completely. The static hissed when I pressed record, faint but alive, like the sound of a conscience stirring after too long. For 3 days, I carried on as if nothing had changed. Breakfasts were quiet, dinners colder than the plates they were served on. He moved around the house like a shadow with perfect timing, smiling when he needed to, vanishing when it mattered. I waited, my silence rehearsed. When I finally listened, I couldn't breathe. The hiss came first, then his voice. Calm, intimate, too intimate. "She thinks I'm at work," he said. "I'll get the papers soon. Just hold on." A woman's voice, soft but trembling, answered, "She trusts you." He laughed, a short, cruel sound that made the air in my lungs turn heavy. "She shouldn't." Every click of that recording felt like a knife sliding between the ribs of memory. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was planning something. Freedom, maybe. For her. A trap for me. That night, I waited for him in the kitchen. The recorder sat inside my pocket, its tape still spinning in my mind. "Tom," I said quietly when he walked in. "Who's Emily?" He blinked, then smiled. "Emily who? Don't play dumb." "You're being paranoid again," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "I heard you." He froze. "Heard what?" "Everything." For a moment there was silence so deep it roared. Then, without warning, he slammed his fist against the wall beside me. The sound cracked through the house, echoing into the hallway where the mirror trembled. "Stop digging," he hissed. "You'll regret it." I stared at him. "I already do." He stormed past me, muttering words I'd never heard him use before, ones that didn't belong to the man I'd married. The door slammed so hard it rattled the vase. And then I realized something. The recorder was still running. When he left the room, I leaned against the wall, shaking. The old mirror across from me caught my reflection, pale, trembling, but unbroken. Behind me, the vase stood tall, silent witness to everything. I didn't stop the tape. I wanted it to breathe him in, to catch every sigh, every word that proved what he'd become. By morning, I had stopped crying. The tears had turned into something colder, something steadier. I went to the bank first thing and signed the papers to withdraw his access to our joint account. Access limit, the first boundary set in years. The clerk didn't ask why. Maybe she saw it in my eyes. When he found out that evening, his reaction was violent but wordless. He slammed a chair against the floor. He shouted into the air, not even forming sentences. The neighbors heard. I saw one of them peek through the blinds across the street. He pointed at me, voice hoarse. "You're destroying us." "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." He left again, slamming the front door behind him. The silence that followed was different this time, heavy but honest. I reached for the recorder, pressed play once more, and listened until the tape clicked to its end. Then I rewound it, labeling it carefully in black ink, reference 17B. Proof now had sound. What he didn't know, what he still doesn't, is that the recorder was still running. The hospital's letter arrived without warning. It came folded twice, the paper thick and official, the kind that feels heavier than truth. I stared at the embossed letterhead, the ink pressed so deep it looked like it wanted to bruise the page. The seal at the top carried the weight of the institution, the same one I had served for years, now quietly turning its back on me. The letter didn't start with compassion. It began with procedure. Following review, it said, we find no sufficient grounds to investigate. Just like that, a paragraph erased the months of doubt, the whispered names, the digital trails that led nowhere except back to him. They called it confidentiality. I called it protection, his protection. The paper felt wrong between my fingers, textured and expensive, like something that belonged to a courtroom, not a conscience. I pressed my thumb against the embossed crest until it hurt. Justice shouldn't have texture, it should have pulse. I wrote my reply that night at the kitchen table. The clock on the wall ticked with the arrogance of bureaucracy, steady, unbothered. I typed every word carefully, stating my evidence, my right to be heard. When I reached the end, I signed it and labeled it clearly. Case reference H42B. The printer coughed out the final page, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. Proof was no longer emotional. It was administrative. Cold, but real. I handed the complaint to Dr. Reed the next morning. He was the ethics arbiter. Fair, polite, endlessly precise. He promised neutrality, the words spoken like a shield. "I'll review everything," he said. "But these things take time." "How much time?" I asked. He hesitated. "Weeks, maybe months." Weeks. I didn't have weeks. Rumors were already starting to move faster than policy. By the end of that week, whispers followed me through the corridors. A nurse avoided my eyes at the supply counter. A colleague stopped mid-conversation when I entered the break room. I knew the pattern. Tom was reshaping the narrative. "Did you hear?" one voice said behind me. "She's unstable. Needs help." Another whispered, "He's the one keeping things quiet, for her sake." The lie was surgical, clean, executed with precision. That night, he came home early. His tone was careful, patient, the voice of a man who'd rehearsed remorse for an audience of one. "You've made a mistake," he said softly. "I'm correcting one," I replied. "You'll destroy everything truth escaped through someone else's mouth. It wasn't mine this time. It came trembling from a girl half my age, her uniform still wrinkled from the night shift. She found me in the staff lounge, eyes darting toward the hallway as if guilt itself might be watching. Her hands shook around the coffee cup she gripped too tightly, leaving small brown crescents on the rim. "I saw them," she whispered, "in the storeroom." The words dropped between us like a breaking glass. For a moment, neither of us moved. The hum of the vending machine filled the pause, cheap and nervous. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. She nodded. "They didn't see me. But it was him. I know it was." I could see the terror tightening her throat. She looked like someone trying to choose between honesty and survival. "Write it down," I said. "Whatever you saw, however small. The truth matters more when it's written." She hesitated, then took the clipboard from my hand. The pen scratched across the page, uneven and quick. When she finished, she signed her name, each letter smaller than the last. The scent of disinfectant lingered on the paper, sharp and sterile, like the air before surgery, before something painful but necessary. I read her words once, twice. There was no mistaking it. His name, the place, the time. The betrayal wasn't rumor anymore. It had coordinates. She looked up at me, eyes wet. "What will happen now?" "Nothing you'll face alone," I said. That night, I filed a notarized copy inside my drawer, behind the envelope of bank records and the recording tape. I even labeled it, neat and calm, reference 26C. The simple act of sealing it felt like armor. Proof was no longer fragile. It was formal. By morning, he knew. He came home silent, colder than usual. His briefcase hit the counter harder than it needed to. "You've been busy," he said flatly. "I've been thorough." His jaw tightened. "That nurse, she'll regret lying." "She didn't lie," I said, voice steady. "She's young, impressionable. Or maybe she's just honest." His silence was worse than shouting. Later that day, I heard he'd called her into his office. 10 minutes. No witnesses. By evening, she wouldn't answer my calls. I found her the next morning by the nurses' lockers. Her face looked pale, her voice hollow. "He told me to retract it," she whispered. "Said I'd lose my job." "You won't," I said. "I promise." She shook her head. "You don't understand how much power he has." I wanted to tell her I did. I wanted to say that I'd lived beneath that shadow for years, but she was trembling, and I couldn't put more weight on her fear. After she left, I made one choice that felt like breathing again. I withdrew all consent. No more shared drives, no more co-signed forms, no more car rides home. Consent withdrawal. My life would no longer orbit his convenience. When HR called, later that week, pretending it was routine clarification, I knew whose hand was behind it. "Is there a misunderstanding?" the woman asked. "No," I said. "Just accountability." The room fell silent on the line, that corporate hush that means someone's afraid to take sides. I hung up and opened my drawer again. The paper still smelled faintly of disinfectant. I ran my thumb along its edge, feeling the weight of her handwriting. Proof had a pulse now. It came from courage, not ink. That night, I sat in the parking lot after my shift, engine off, windows down. The air was damp, the world too quiet. I stared at the hospital windows, wondering which one she'd looked through last before she spoke. I told myself I'd see her tomorrow, thank her properly. She'd done what most wouldn't. She'd told the truth. But when morning came, her locker was empty, her nameplate gone. No note, no forwarding address. She disappeared before her next shift. Every reflection showed me a stranger. I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. Her eyes had grown tired of disbelief. Her mouth carried the quiet shape of endurance. The candle flame beside the mirror trembled, throwing light that made her face both real and ghostly. Maybe that's what truth does. It flickers until you're ready to look straight at it. Therapy became the only place I could breathe. The room was small, warm, smelling faintly of coffee and lavender, a couch that sagged just enough to hold my exhaustion. My therapist sat opposite me, calm, steady, eyes trained on the pieces of me I didn't know were visible. "You've spent years defending him," she said softly. "When did you last defend yourself?" The question landed like a bruise I hadn't felt form. "I thought I was," I murmured. "By staying." She tilted her head. "Staying isn't the same as surviving." The light flickered again, brushing over my tears. The candle's flame looked alive, swaying like it understood everything I hadn't said. I realized then, silence had been my loyalty, not love. She asked me to document everything, every threat, every manipulation, every time his version of reality replaced mine. "Write it down before it rewrites you," she said. So I did. I started with the night he called me crazy in front of the HR board. Then the morning he switched my keys. Then the afternoon he smiled and told me I imagined the scent of another woman on his coat. By the third page, my handwriting began to tremble. By the fifth, I could finally read it without crying. The session transcript from reference 12F noted the time, 6:42 p.m., when I broke down. I remember the sound, the clock ticking too loudly, the candle snapping as the wick split. 3 months of gaslight were verified in ink, neat and neutral, but it felt like an autopsy of my sanity. I read the lines back later that night. Patient acknowledges distortion of memory induced by sustained external contradiction. It was a diagnosis of deceit. At home, I found the last photo of us. We were smiling, his arm heavy across my shoulder, mine resting on his chest. I remembered that day. He had told me the light was perfect, that I should keep my chin up. Even then, he was framing my compliance as beauty. I lit the same candle from therapy and watched the edges of the photograph curl inward. The smoke rose slow, curling toward the ceiling like a prayer gone astray. "I'm done protecting what hurts me," I whispered. The mirror across the room reflected the flame. It looked smaller there, but sharper. For the first time, I didn't flinch at my reflection. The woman staring back wasn't broken. She was recording. I gathered every note, every copy, every time-stamped entry into a folder. The sound of the paper stack was clean, final. Each page had weight. Proof wasn't an object anymore. It was my voice, recovered and written down. When I told my therapist I was ready for exposure, she nodded. "He'll resist," she warned. "People like him always do." "I know," I said, "but this time he'll be seen." She smiled faintly. "You already are." That night, the phone rang while I was washing dishes. I almost didn't answer. His voice was calm, too calm. "I heard you've been talking," he said. I said nothing. "You've been recording sessions?" His tone cracked for the first time. "Those are confidential." "I didn't record them," I said quietly. "You did, every time you lied." He exhaled, sharp and quick. "I'll fix this," he muttered. But the candle flame wavered again, as if warning me. I knew what fix meant in his language. Control, erasure. The next morning, my therapist called. Her voice was cautious. "He reached out to me," she said. "What did he want?" "He demanded your notes." The mirror behind me caught the faintest shimmer of light as I whispered back, "Then he's already afraid." I drafted my freedom like a patient chart, each line deliberate, measured, and sterile. The document sat before me, its language cold but merciful. My name, his name, the date, June 7th. The petition bore the raised seal of county court, heavy as consequence. I traced the indentation with my fingertip, the paper's texture reminding me that freedom, like truth, always leaves an impression. The office smelled faintly of toner and old carpet. My attorney, Ms. Grant, sat across from me, her glasses balanced low as she reviewed each clause. "You understand, once this is filed, there's no reversing it," she said. "I understand," I replied. My voice surprised me, steady, unshaken. "He'll respond," she warned. "Men like him always do." She wasn't wrong. He had already begun. The hospital HR had called earlier that morning, hinting at concerns over misplaced funds, false allegations, coordinated whispers. He was already shifting from personal cruelty to institutional warfare. I signed my name at the bottom of the page. The pen left a faint groove, pressing through to the copy beneath. Each stroke felt final, a quiet incision closing the wound instead of deepening it. When Ms. Grant stamped the final page, the metallic sound echoed through the room, one clean click that sounded too much like a heartbeat. She slid the notice into a manila folder marked Reference C-19. "You've just taken your first step toward safety," she said. I nodded. "And my last toward him." Leaving her office, I stepped into the bright hallway. The overhead light glared against the polished tile, harsh but honest. It was the kind of light that didn't hide the cracks. It exposed them. I passed the bulletin board by the elevator, where the courthouse schedules were pinned. Hearings, appeals, settlements. Each slip of paper told someone's story of collapse and reclamation. Back home, I placed my copy of the notice inside the same drawer where the earlier proofs lived. The recording, the bank statements, the nurse's affidavit. The drawer was full now, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a grave. It felt like evidence of endurance. The next morning, his call came. "I saw what you did," he said, voice clipped, rehearsed. "I did what was necessary." "You'll regret this." "No," I said. "I've already lived my regret." He went silent, then spoke low. "You think paper will protect you?" "Paper holds truth," I answered, "and truth has a seal." He laughed softly. "Then I'll burn the truth with you." That line stayed with me long after the call ended. His threats had lost their volume, but not their venom. I wrote the words down in my notebook, each one documented, time-stamped. The discipline of recording had become armor. By afternoon, Ms. Grant called. The filings confirmed. County clerk logged it under entry 14A7. I thanked her, then sat in silence for a long moment. The house felt strange. Emptier, yes, but lighter, too. The air didn't carry his echo anymore. Later that evening, I unfolded the duplicate notice once more. The seal caught the lamplight, its ridged pattern glinting faintly like a wound healing into scar tissue. The texture beneath my thumb was rough, honest, proof that something permanent had begun. I realized then that endings don't always collapse. They can also hold. The paper wasn't just my declaration of withdrawal. It was the first printed proof of my resurrection. Still, peace didn't last. The following day, a letter arrived. Anonymous envelope, no return address. Inside, just 7 words written in his familiar hand. "I'll ruin you before I let you go." And for the first time, I smiled. Not from relief, but recognition. Because his threat confirmed it. I was already gone. He went public before I could speak. His voice filled the room through my laptop speakers, calm and confident, rehearsed for sympathy. The podcast host introduced him like a man wounded by injustice. "A respected professional facing false accusations," she said. My name followed next, stretched and twisted through static, like something dragged across gravel. I pressed pause halfway through his first lie. The microphone on the screen caught a glint of light, like a blade reflecting sun. The symbol wasn't lost on me. When I hit play again, he was describing himself as the victim, how I'd turned bitter, how my instability had damaged his reputation. The host hummed in agreement, her tone thick with scripted empathy. Every sentence carried a calculation. Every sigh was choreography. The sound of his voice filled the silence of my kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator became background percussion, a rhythm to my humiliation. I reached for the coffee mug beside me and realized my hand was trembling. Not from fear, but fury. My phone buzzed. A message from a former colleague. "You need to hear the unedited cut." Attached was an audio file labeled Reference 17A, time-stamped 17 minutes and 42 seconds. I played it once, then again. The host's questions were there, but the edits weren't. In the raw version, his pauses were longer, his temper sharper. He had stumbled when asked about the nurse, the one who vanished after her confession. His answer, cut from the live release, was a mess of denial and diversion. "She was unstable," he said. "She made things up. People like that, they don't last in hospitals. People like that." I stopped the audio. The sound of his arrogance lingered like an echo I couldn't mute. Later that evening, I took notes. Every detail, every lie, every omission. My pen dug hard into the paper, pressing through the page until I could feel the ridges on the desk beneath. The entry read cleanly. Broadcast distortion documented, 17 minutes 42 seconds. I played the clip again, this time through headphones. The static made it worse. It hissed like a warning. Then, faintly, I heard something else. A caller's voice breaking through near the end. "What about the missing nurse?" The host moved past it too quickly. He cleared his throat and laughed. "Urban legend," he said. I took off the headphones and sat back. My reflection caught in the dark screen, faint and tired, but alive. The lies had finally reached daylight. The next morning I called Ms. Grant. "They're spreading his story everywhere," I told her. "Let them," she said. "It's his oxygen. When you speak, it'll choke him." Her calm steadied me. "They'll invite me soon, won't they?" "They already have," she said quietly. "I got the email before you called." I didn't answer right away. Outside, the sky was pale, almost white, like paper waiting for ink. The first headline appeared that afternoon. Hospital scandal deepens. Personal feud or professional sabotage. My face was blurred beside his smiling one, public sympathy tilted toward him. People always preferred the man who sounded composed over the woman who sounded wounded. Still, I wasn't afraid. I was cataloging everything, each headline, each mention, each lie made permanent by broadcast. My vow returned like breath after drowning. Truth will have its audience. That night, I stood near the open window. The faint hum of city noise drifted through the curtains. In the distance, a radio played his voice again, softer this time, carried by air I could no longer control. I closed my eyes and listened, not to him, but to the silence between his words. That was where the truth lived now, waiting for its turn. When the call came, it wasn't Ms. Grant. It was the host. Her tone was different, measured, polite. "We'd like to offer you a right of reply," she said. "Live broadcast, tomorrow evening." I could hear the faint buzz of studio lights behind her voice, the shuffle of papers, the breath of preparation. "Will he be there?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "He insists." The silence stretched between us, long enough for me to taste the decision forming. "I'll be there," I said finally. She hesitated. "Any statement you'd like to share beforehand?" I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "No," I said. "The truth doesn't need a preview." They invited me to respond, live. I faced him under fluorescent light. The room was too bright. White walls, white ceiling, white silence. The kind of light that refuses to let anyone hide. Rows of faces filled the benches behind me. Some familiar from the hospital, some strangers drawn by the scent of scandal. The air carried that dry chill unique to courtrooms, equal parts order and judgment. The clerk's voice echoed through the chamber. "Hearing reference 24B, County Review Board." Papers shuffled, microphones clicked. Then came the gavel, one sharp crack that stilled every whisper. I looked across the room. He sat at the opposite table, shoulders squared, wearing that same mask of composure he'd perfected for years. His lawyer leaned close, murmuring something into his ear. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. The tension between us had its own language now. My attorney, Ms. Grant, touched my arm lightly. "It's time," she whispered. When I rose, the fluorescent light caught the edge of the folder in my hands. The paper glowed faintly, the embossed county court seal shining through the thin material. I took one steady breath, the kind that carries both fear and freedom. "The record before you," I began, "is a formal complaint filed June 7th. Complaint record, medical board, entry H42B. The words left my mouth like a release valve opening. Each syllable carried weight, pressing into the air like truth being printed in real time. His lawyer stood abruptly. "Objection! Irrelevant, prejudicial." The judge's gavel struck again. "Overruled. Proceed." I turned another page. My voice didn't shake this time. "The document verifies that the initial report was made internally under institutional protocol. It includes corroboration from a medical ethics arbiter." I lifted the paper slightly. Reference entry H42B shows the precise timeline of his actions: false reports, withheld consent, retaliatory pressure. Someone in the back gasped. Another whispered, "That's the nurse." For a moment, the hum of the bench clock filled the silence between questions. Its second hand ticked so loudly it seemed to measure guilt itself. Every movement of that clock was a reminder. Justice was slow but steady. His lawyer tried again. "She's misinterpreting the documentation. There's no conclusive—" I cut in before he could finish. "There's proof. Right here, cross-signed, notarized, time-stamped 6:42 p.m., the same time his message threatened to have me removed." Ms. Grant handed the paper to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. The fluorescent light bounced off the page, throwing a reflection across the polished bench. It looked almost alive, like the light itself wanted to testify. The judge read silently for a long moment. Then he looked at him. "Is this your signature?" His lips parted, then pressed shut again. No answer, just a flicker of movement, his jaw tightening, his fingers curling against the table. The crowd's energy shifted. It was subtle at first, a collective lean forward, the breath of curiosity turning into realization. For the first time, the story wasn't his to tell. I could feel my pulse echo in my ears. After all the months of gaslight and humiliation, there it was, proof in daylight, under fluorescent truth. Ms. Grant spoke next, her tone measured but firm. "The pattern is consistent, Your Honor. Her claim wasn't vengeance. It was documentation." The judge nodded slightly. "Let the record show that the evidence has been verified." Another murmur rippled through the room. I caught fragments. So she was right. That's the letter. He forged the memo. I didn't turn to face them. My eyes stayed on the bench clock. Its minute hand had moved only once since I began, yet everything had changed within that single mark of time. Justice moved quietly that day. No explosions, no cinematic triumph, just a measured breath after years of holding it in. The light felt warmer now, less like interrogation, more like release. The judge shifted his gaze back to him. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "one question." The room stilled again. Even the clock seemed to pause. "Why?" the judge asked. "Did you erase the nurse's testimony from the institutional log?" He blinked once, then again. His mouth opened. No sound came. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was absolute. The gavel came down once more, echoing like a closing door. The judge asked him one question he couldn't answer. Authority writes in ink, not whispers. The verdict arrived on a gray morning, carried by a clerk whose shoes echoed through the marble corridor. The envelope was heavy, sealed with the insignia of the medical board. Its weight felt ceremonial, justice compressed into paper. When I touched it, the texture caught against my fingertips, thick and ridged, as if it resisted being opened too easily. Inside, the words were simple. License revoked, misconduct confirmed. No emotion, no flourish, only law. I read them twice before they settled into meaning. It wasn't victory I felt. It was gravity, a final line drawn through years of deceit. Outside the hearing chamber, the crowd had already gathered. Patients, nurses, colleagues who once looked away. Someone whispered, "They did it." Another voice followed, louder, trembling with relief. "Finally!" The word rippled through the hall like an exhale the whole building had been holding. He stood across from me, flanked by his attorney, the same composure cracking now under fluorescent scrutiny. His hands were clenched at his sides, knuckles white against the dark fabric of his suit. The light above him hummed softly, flickering once, almost like the system itself sighing. I didn't move closer. The paper in my hand was enough. It was proof, not revenge. The official order, logged under entry 21C, carried every name and timestamp that mattered. Each line was a counterweight to every lie he'd once told. Authority had written what love refused to admit. He was guilty. The arbiter, Dr. Reed, approached quietly. "It's over," he said. His tone wasn't celebratory. It was reverent, almost mournful. "They've closed his clinic, effective immediately." "How?" I asked, my voice a whisper against the noise of approval outside. "Typed decree, signed last night. The shutters came down at dawn." The words painted an image in my mind. The clinic's glass doors locked, the lights turned off, the hallway where patients once waited, now emptied of sound. The same place where my silence had been weaponized was now sealed shut. He finally looked at me. His eyes had lost their usual sharpness. They were vacant, drained of the certainty that once ruled them. For years, he had controlled every version of the story, rewriting, revising, erasing, but not this time. The truth had learned how to spell itself without him. He stepped forward, voice low but unsteady. "You destroyed everything I built." The sentence hung between us like smoke. I almost laughed at the irony, but didn't. Destruction, after all, had been his craft long before mine. I just stopped pretending it was love. Folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into its envelope. "No," I said softly. "You did that when you forgot what healing meant." The clock above the chamber struck noon, the sound clean and metallic. It marked not just the hour, but the ending. The crowd began to move, conversations rising like surf, relief, outrage, disbelief, all of it mixing into one long human murmur. As I walked past him, I caught a faint reflection in the glass door. His posture was still proud, but the light behind him was gone. The board's ruling had taken not just his title, but his shadow. Outside, the air felt sharper, alive. A single paper, thin, textured, bearing the weight of justice, had undone years of manipulation. The sound of it folding in my hand was louder than his entire defense. Some endings don't announce themselves. They just arrive, signed and sealed, indifferent to emotion. Authority had written the truth, and for the first time, it couldn't be edited. He whispered again, almost to himself, "You destroyed everything I built." But this time, there was no echo, just the quiet dignity of consequence. The news called it closure. I called it aftermath. The courthouse steps had turned into a stage again, only this time I wasn't performing. Cameras lined the gate like sentinels, their red lights blinking in rhythm with the shouts of reporters. The flash from a dozen bulbs struck my face at once. Too bright, too sudden. The light felt like a verdict of its own. Someone yelled, "Look this way!" Another called my name, their tone rehearsed, hungry for a reaction. I didn't give them one. The documents in my hands, creased, marked, and notarized, were already speaking louder than I could. The air smelled faintly of rain and concrete dust. I could hear the crowd pressing forward, the clatter of shoes against stone. Somewhere behind me, a woman whispered, "She did it." I wasn't sure whether it was admiration or disbelief. Across the gate, the cameras caught him leaving. His posture was unrecognizable, shoulders sunken, head lowered, no defense left to build. His lawyer tried to shield him, but the lens followed anyway. Every step he took became footage, every silence a headline waiting to be written. The first reporter reached me. "Do you feel vindicated?" I paused, letting the question hang. "I feel finished," I said quietly. Another voice cut through the noise. "Will you pursue damages?" I looked past them, toward the empty street beyond the courthouse. "Justice isn't a currency," I said. "It's a correction." They scribbled it down like a quote fit for morning news. Behind them, a broadcast van's engine hummed, and the screen on its side flickered to life. My own image stared back at me. Tired eyes, trembling hands, the faint sheen of sweat beneath courthouse light. It didn't look like triumph. It looked like release. The footage aired within the hour. Across televisions, phones, and streaming feeds, the nation saw the same image. A woman clutching evidence, while the man she once trusted walked away under a cloud of his own making. The anchors called it closure. The lower banner read, "Verdict delivered. Career ended in scandal." But closure isn't what it felt like. It was quieter than that. The witnesses stood near the courthouse gate, watching. One of them, the junior nurse, the only one who hadn't vanished, caught my eye and gave a small nod. It was enough. Proof had become public, and silence had been replaced by broadcast. The microphones kept flashing. "What will you do next?" someone shouted. I thought of the years I'd spent proving what should have been believed the first time. The sleepless nights, the letters unanswered, the sessions where I spoke until my voice cracked. Freedom, I realized, doesn't sound like applause. It sounds like quiet, the kind that finally belongs to you. The camera lens glimmered as I turned slightly, catching one last reflection of myself. The light flared across it, softening my features into something almost peaceful. The crowd behind me had already begun to move on, chasing the next story. One reporter called out again, desperate. "Just one more quote, for the record." I looked at the courthouse gate, its iron bars catching the same pale light that had once felt cruel. The morning air had shifted. It smelled of wet stone and spent flash powder. I tightened my grip on the papers, took one slow breath, and turned away before they asked for one last quote. Silence became my truest witness. When I stepped back into the house, it no longer felt haunted. The same walls that once carried arguments now held only breath and space. Dust had settled evenly across everything. The shelves, the windowsill, even the old rocking chair by the corner. For the first time, I didn't rush to wipe it away. Silence was proof that chaos had finally left. I walked slowly through each room, fingertips brushing against the familiar textures. The air was cooler here, faintly sweet, carrying the scent of old wood and lavender polish. On the table lay a small stack of unopened letters, months old. I didn't need to read them. Some stories end better when they stay unread. The photograph drawer caught my attention. I pulled it open and paused. Among dozens of smiling faces, vacations, and hospital fundraisers, one picture stood out, me in uniform, standing alone on clinic steps before everything began to crumble. My hand trembled slightly as I slid it from the pile. The glass frame bit the edge of my finger when I placed it in. A thin red line appeared, just enough to sting. It startled me, but it also reminded me I was still alive, still human beyond the wreckage. I set the framed photo on the mantel beside the old candle that hadn't been lit in months. The flame, when I struck the match, flickered weakly before steadying itself. I watched it dance in the reflection of the photograph. The light felt neither harsh nor forgiving, just honest. The knock at the door came softly. Claire stepped in, her face calm, her voice gentler than I remembered. "I was nearby," she said. "Thought I'd check in." "You always did," I replied with a small smile. She looked around the room, taking in the stillness. "It's different now," she said. "It is," I agreed. "Peace has a sound, doesn't it?" We shared a moment of quiet that didn't need filling. She sat on the rocking chair, running her hand over the armrest. "You kept it." "I kept everything that didn't lie," I said. We talked briefly, about her new job, about the city reopening the clinic under new management. When she mentioned that they wanted me back as a consultant, I only smiled. "Not yet," I said. "Maybe one day. For now, I need to learn how to rest." Outside, the light shifted. Evening had begun to lean against the windows, washing the room in amber. The air moved slightly, carrying with it a low hum through the hallway. I realized I no longer flinched at sounds. Even the wind was just wind again. Claire stood, touching my shoulder. "You did more than survive," she said softly. I nodded. I just stopped believing his version of me. When she left, I stayed near the window for a long time. The world outside looked ordinary. Children's laughter faint in the distance, a car door closing, a dog barking once before quiet returned. Ordinary was beautiful. I turned back toward the rocking chair and sat. The frame beside the candle caught the last flicker of daylight. My reflection met my gaze in the glass. Older, yes, but not broken. The kind of face that has finally stopped apologizing for existing. No more lies, no more vigilance. Only the sound of the wind threading through the open window and the soft rhythm of my breath finding its own pace again. My vow had always been justice, but somewhere along the way it became something quieter, restoration, the kind that asks for nothing loud, only honesty. When I stood to close the window, the draft caught the back door. It swung slowly, hinges sighing, then shut with a gentle thud. The wind closed the door behind me. Forgiveness reads like a diagnosis you finally accept. Months had passed since the verdict, yet time didn't feel linear anymore. It bent quietly, looping between what was and what could still be healed. The house had its own rhythm now, the slow tick of the hallway clock, the occasional creak from the floorboards, the soft scent of lavender oil I'd started using again. It wasn't for memory this time. It was for calm. I sat by the table with my notebook open. The first page already carried old ink stains, words written in desperation. Tonight, though, the lines waited clean and blank. The candle beside me burned low, its wax forming small golden pools along the rim, the smell of wax and lavender mixed, warm and almost medicinal. I began to write. "Dear me." The first words came easily. Then I stopped, staring at the paper for nearly a full minute before continuing. "You are not what he said. You never were." My handwriting wavered, but I didn't correct it. The imperfections felt honest. Therapy had taught me that truth doesn't need to be rewritten. It only needs to be faced. Each sentence felt like an exhale after years of holding my breath. I wrote about the hearings, about the witnesses who stayed silent, about the moment the truth finally stood taller than fear. And then I wrote about myself, not as a victim, but as someone who chose not to disappear. "You were brave when no one was watching," I wrote. "You stayed when running would have been easier." The candlelight trembled against the window pane, throwing faint shadows that looked almost like hands reaching out. For once, I didn't flinch from reflection. The therapist's words echoed in my mind. Healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering differently. She'd said it during our last session, tapping her pen against the folder marked with my initials. I smiled now, hearing her voice as clearly as if she were in the room. I picked up the small folder from the edge of the table. Inside, a note written months ago confirmed my closure. Session 12 completed, emotional discharge recorded, progress marked as stable. I touched the corner of that paper like one might touch a scar, gently, respectfully. The mirror across the room reflected the candle's glow and the faint outline of my figure. I used to avoid mirrors. They showed too much. Tired eyes, hollow cheeks, a woman rearranging fragments into something that still looked whole. Now I walked closer, journal in hand, until my reflection met my eyes without flinching. "You remember her?" I whispered softly. "The nurse who believed in care before control." The words didn't echo. They landed, settled. The scent of lavender deepened as the flame bent low, then steadied. I took one last look at the journal, reading over the lines I'd written. They weren't confessions anymore. They were acknowledgments. Each sentence was both a goodbye and a beginning. I closed the notebook and pressed my palm against its cover. "You did enough," I murmured. "You became enough." A small gust of air slipped through the cracks of the old window. It fluttered the page corner, as if inviting me to write more. But I didn't. For once, the silence said everything that needed saying. Outside, the night was calm. No reporters, no hearings, no eyes watching. Just the ordinary sound of the world carrying on. I placed the journal beside the mirror, its reflection glowing in candlelight. It looked like a promise kept. The lavender scent lingered in the air, faint but steady. "Tomorrow I will open the window again." Light entered like forgiveness. The morning unfolded with a kind of clarity I hadn't known in years. It wasn't loud or triumphant, just clean, the kind of quiet that doesn't demand explanation. The hospital corridor shimmered faintly under sunlight that slipped through glass panels, scattering across polished floors. The scent of disinfectant and coffee mingled softly in the air, familiar and strangely comforting. I stood by the new floor's reception desk, the name tag freshly clipped to my coat. The letters gleamed, simple, unadorned, mine. Not borrowed, not hidden. Behind the counter, a young nurse sorted files with careful hands. Her voice broke the stillness. "You've been here before, haven't you?" I nodded. "A long time ago. Different floor." She smiled without pressing. "First day back?" "First morning that feels like one," I said. The light warmed the charts stacked beside me, their paper edges curling faintly from humidity. I traced a finger along the top file. One patient, one story, one chance to begin without lies. A new roster hung on the wall, freshly printed and stamped with the hospital seal. My name appeared midway down, right under the heading, Nursing Schedule, Revised Allocation. It looked ordinary, which made it extraordinary. As I walked toward the first room, the hum of monitors filled the hallway. I remembered how sound used to feel like judgment, every beep a reminder of what had been taken from me. But today it was rhythm, not punishment. I reached the patient's door. A chart waited on the hook, crisp and new. When I opened it, I saw the note space blank, pure white, waiting for handwriting. My pulse slowed. The pen in my pocket felt heavier than I remembered. The young nurse followed me in, curious but kind. "Why did you come back?" she asked quietly. I looked at her, at the innocence that hadn't yet learned the language of bureaucracy or betrayal. "Because truth deserves witnesses," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It didn't need to. She tilted her head, as if turning the phrase over in her mind. "That's beautiful," she murmured. "Does it always end like that?" "No," I said softly. "But sometimes it begins again like this." The sunlight climbed the wall, spilling across the medical chart. The glow touched the inked lines where I began to write, the first note of the day. My handwriting was slow, deliberate, but steady. Each stroke felt like reclaiming something small, but real. Across the hall, I caught a glimpse of the arbiter, the same one who'd presided over the hearing months ago. He stood in the waiting area, speaking with administration. When our eyes met briefly, he gave a subtle nod. Not acknowledgement of victory, acknowledgement of truth. That was enough. I thought of all the names, the faces, the years blurred between fear and endurance. I thought of the promise I made in that courtroom, to speak even when my voice broke. And here I was, back where everything had begun, only this time the silence served me. The morning light softened as it spread. The rings on my fingers, one from years past, one new, caught it briefly. They shone together, overlapping, neither replacing the other. Renewal doesn't erase the past. It reframes it. Outside, the world continued. Announcements echoed, stretchers rolled, life moved with its own insistence. But in that moment, standing under the gentle weight of mourning, I felt something settle inside me, something like peace, or maybe its quieter cousin, acceptance. I closed the chart, the pen still warm between my fingers. The scent of coffee drifted again from the nurse's station. The clock above the doorway ticked once, then again, each sound folding perfectly into the day's rhythm. I looked at the next file waiting on the counter. My breath steadied, my shoulders lifted, and the light, ever persistent, followed me down the corridor. And this time, the note was mine to write.